ready, and let me know when you've got that. You've got that going all. Okay, I think we're ready.
Okay. We'll call the meeting to order. This time we'll do our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America,
United States,
and to the republic for which it
and to
stands,
the republic, stand
one nation,
nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. Due to the health and safety concerns related to COVID-19 coronavirus, this meeting will be conducted by video conference. A quorum of the board will be participating in the video conference in accordance with the provision in section 551.125 or 551.127 of the Texas Government Code that have not been suspended by order of the governor. Please note that there is no physical location for this meeting in order to ensure safe social distancing during the COVID-19 pandemic. Members of the public may access this meeting via live stream at victoriaisd.swagit.com/live. An electronic copy of the agenda and notice may be viewed on the following link: www.visd.net. A recording of the meeting will be available for viewing on
Tammy, we lost him completely. He disappeared. Would you mind?
Here, I had it up, but I was looking for my hand raise feature, which I'm not 100% familiar with on this particular advice. So Mike, you'll have to bear with me. Okay, so I think he was just saying that how you access the meeting via live stream, an electronic copy and notice may be viewed on the following link at www.visd.net, and a recording of the meeting will be available for viewing on the district's website. Public comments will be limited to topics on the agenda. Individuals wishing to address the Board of Trustees must submit a public comment form online by 12 p.m. the day of the board meeting. So we've called the meeting to order, had the Pledge of Allegiance, and announcement by the president that this is, or the vice president, that this is a special meeting and that notice of the meeting has been posted in the time and manner required, and there is a quorum present. And I see President Van Hook is back with us, so that leaves us on item 4. President Van Hook.
And you'll need to unmute, sir.
Thank you so much, Tammy. We're at the public testimony and open forum. Dr. Shepard, we have some.
There was one comment submitted by the deadline today.
Okay.
Good evening. Our comment tonight is from Dale Zuck. In the interest of transparency, the bond capacity and repayment numbers do not match up. According to the 2020 VISD certified audit report, the trustees are overtaxing and collecting about 8 cents more than is needed to pay the 2008 bond issue. Page 100 of the CAPER 2020 question 1. Please explain how the first $99.6 million of a new debt does not incur any payment. Is it true those 8 cents you are currently overtaxing us are the monies which will be used to pay for the first $100 million of your proposed bond? Yes or no? In the same line of questioning, question 2 on page 21 of your January 21st video meeting, the presentation specifically states that the INS rate, 22.35 per 100, does not change until the debt hits $106,875,000. Who is recommending the school board authorize the collection of more tax revenue than is needed to pay the principal and interest schedule as required from the refinance 2008 bond issue. Question 3, regarding the collection of more tax money needed to pay the 2008 bond issue, how many millions of dollars have been collected more than was needed to pay your annual bond principal and interest schedule requirement? Hint, according to your audited finance reports, 2010 to 2020, that number is approximately 25 million. 2020 caper P, page 125, question 4. If your INS rate has stayed essentially the same at $22.35 to $23.44 since 2015, how has the trustees been able to accumulate almost $15 million more than what you paid to the bondholders during that period of time? Question 5. In 2018, your INS surplus bond fund had almost $18 million in that account. Because the school district was not allowed to pay extra principal off, Dr. Shepard got the board out of trouble with the TEA by using a little used financial technique called deficits. Deficits is taking of taxpayer money and buying US Treasury bonds. Yes or no? Did the trustees essentially take the taxpayer savings account money and place the money into the VISD savings account? Question 6. Is it in the best interest of the individual members of the public to pay the school district more money so the trustees can place taxpayer monies into the VISD INS fund balance? If you say yes, why is it in the public's interest to be overtaxed? Question 7. Is it essentially dishonest to say you are going to spend 7.5 cents more to build and fix schools when in essence the district will be using an additional 8 cents, which is overtaxing the public in the collection of the previous bond issue?
Thank you so much. Are we back? Thank you for those questions, Mr. Zook, and we're going to move forward to informational session. This informational session is for the trustees to ask questions regarding the recommendation of the bond planning task force and to provide direction regarding the bond process. The ISD Bond Council, financial advisors, architects, and other district administrators will be present to provide information and answer questions. Before we get started, I also wanted to remind us that we had 40 people, community and staff, part of a task force preparing what was necessary before we got to this point. And I would like for us to honor that, if we would, honor the work that has been done by them, recognize the work that has been done by them. Thank you, board.
Good evening, President Van Hook, Mrs. Keeling, members of the board, Dr. Shepard. Thank you. It's good to see you all again. Feels like it hadn't been that long since we last talked, so that's a nice thing. We are here tonight to delve into further detail on the proposal or the recommendations that you received from members of the bond planning task force at our regular meeting last Thursday. I'd like to start by sharing a very brief presentation, just an overview of some of the information that the task force presented, along with some additional detail to provide around those recommendations, followed by an opportunity for the board to ask questions for not only the administrative leadership team, myself and Francis representing the leadership team, but also several of the partners, representatives that have worked with us, including bond counsel, financial advisors for the district, and Huckabee Architects. I'll go ahead and share my screen and walk through this brief presentation with you. So I always have to make this reminder at the bottom, there's a hyperlink there, visd.net bond task force that has all materials that the bond planning task force covered over the course of their 16-month journey. The task force recommendations, to reiterate what was presented to the board last Thursday, the VISD Bond Planning Task Force recommends the Board of Trustees call for a May 1st, 2021 bond election to include the following projects: Stroman Middle School rebuild, Mission Valley Elementary rebuild, priority repairs district-wide, and new playgrounds for elementary schools. You can see the costs associated with those various projects that are recommended by the task force, coming out to a total of $156,842,374 as an estimate. Please note, you'll see an asterisk there. I've heard some questions and conversation regarding cost estimates. And it's important to note, as we compare and contrast potential apples to apples versus apples to oranges, when we look at numbers, that these numbers that the bond planning task force was working with were inclusive of several costs above and beyond just the straight construction cost that one could expect when you might build a house and have square footage and a certain cost per square foot. Those additional costs include things like furniture, fixtures, equipments, permits, fees, contingencies, and recognizing that work is not done the moment that a bond is passed. In fact, when you build, let's just use the example of a middle school, the average is going to take you 3 years before that thing actually opens up, and a couple years before you're actually doing the work. So there's escalation from the time of estimating the cost per square foot today versus what it might be at the time that a new middle school was to break ground. So those assumptions are placed in those costs as well. The bond planning task force also provided the Board of Trustees with a mid-range recommendation. The task force recommends that Shields Elementary be planned for rebuild in approximately 5 years. One of the things that the task force considered was, what would that estimated cost be 5 years from now? So again, you'll see that total estimated cost for a rebuild of Shields Elementary, that's not in today's dollars or an estimate based on today's square foot price. That's based on an estimated escalation over the course of a number of years. Task force also presented this information about the estimated tax effect of a bond of $156.842 million. It would result in an estimated 7.5 cent INS tax rate increase, which equates to an increase of approximately $6.25 a month per $100,000 of taxable home value. This chart just lays out that same information. If this bond proposal were to move forward and be successful, our current INS rate, which is 0.2235, would rise to 0.2985. This diagram was also shared with the board in the last meeting, with a 7.5 cent tax rate increase in 2021. Our financial advisors have shared with us that it's estimated that VISD would have approximately $50 million of additional bonding capacity in 5 years, May of 2026, at the same INS tax rate of 0.2985. This was important to the work of the task force because they were charged not only with coming forward to the board with a short range plan for today, they were also charged with looking forward, recognizing that we have aging infrastructure, that we have 15 campuses that are over 50 years old, 10 of those being over 60 years old currently, recognizing that the concept of 14 years between a potential bond now and the next bond, given that our last bond was 14 years ago, is not necessarily the best planning practice from the task force's point of view. Because of the age of those facilities. Time will march on. And so the task force took into consideration bonding capacity in 5 years, noting that there were several campuses that, due to age and also due to the programming that will be a part of those campuses, those innovative campuses, that the task force had rich discussion around, ultimately landing on a recommendation of Shields with the idea that that capacity could be leveraged in approximately 5 years to rebuild Shields without increasing the tax rate at that time. You've seen these charts a couple of times. Just reiterate, and something that we can potentially come back to should the board need to review any of this information through the questions and discussion. One of the exercises that the task force went through was, as they looked at this facilities assessment document and the needs that were documented across our entire district, they recognized, you know, we've got a challenge in front of us here. We don't believe we can go out with a bond for hundreds of millions of dollars at this point in time, even though the needs that come forward and the number of campuses the group might have wanted to consider rebuilding would rise to that level of cost. And they went through an exercise of looking at per penny increase on the INS tax rate, what is the revenue generated and what is that cost impact on a monthly basis to a $100,000, a $200,000 homeowner. And so you can see that data here, going from 1 cent all the way up to 27 cents, which would basically take us to what would be the INS tax rate maximum. This was, again, an exercise. This was not an indication that the task force was considering recommending raising the tax rate by 27 cents. It was simply an exercise to understand from zero to what amount, what would be the maximum capacity that could be generated by the VISD. Task force recommendation project review. It's going to be a little more detail here in terms of our conversation about the task force recommendations. We'll start with Stroman Middle School. Again, that rebuild cost estimated at $73,764,268. That embeds all of those additional costs that come anytime you embark on a construction project. That's not simply the cost of construction itself. This is for construction of a new middle school for a planned capacity of 1,200 students to replace the existing Stroman Middle School campus. It's important to note that one of the conversations among the task force, one of the conversations that's taken place among the board and our district as we've moved to the innovative pathways, and we'll be bringing forward the STEM campus at Stroman next year, is that part of that pathway is that students have voice and choice, and that parents have voice and choice. And we recognize right now with our current capacity across our middle schools, we're near capacity where we are currently. In order to provide unique programming and provide choice outside of the students who are already zoned to Stroman Middle School, building it at its current size, or I should say current usable functional size at Stroman Middle School, would not allow for voice or choice by students to choose to elect to participate in that STEM pathway at Stroman Middle School if it was built at around 900 to 950 capacity that is functionally at right now. This is assuming that the building would be built, constructed at the existing site. I need to make sure that we are very clear that there's been no design. This is not an architecturally designed campus at this point. These are planning estimates. We engaged with Huckabee Architects to help us with the facility assessment and to share that information with our task force. But there are many details that come later in the process. So this is not a designed facility. So we've had some questions about, well, what does that mean? Where exactly on the land would it sit? What would we do with the students during the time? Those are all answers we would absolutely have as we went through the design and phase processes of a successful bond, but they're not, those would be, we'd be moving ahead of ourselves to have designed a facility at this point in time. This would be a campus that would provide a secure campus with modern learning environments to meet the STEM pathway programming. You know, as you talk to our staff, as we've gone around and talked with staff as a part of the facility assessment, and specifically at Stroman, those are concerns. Those are concerns about the secure nature of the campus, given the open campus design, as well as the STEM pathway and the current learning environments within the classrooms. For Mission Valley Elementary School rebuild, again, you'll see that estimated planning estimate cost at slightly over $23 million. Again, that is with all those additional costs embedded. That is a planning estimate cost of construction of a new elementary school for 400 students to replace the existing Mission Valley Elementary campus. Currently, we have anywhere from typically 250 to 280 students at Mission Valley. We also regularly have to, the terminology we use is cap students. When a grade level gets larger than we are allowed to have at the elementary level, students are required to attend another campus. That regularly happens with Mission Valley. As we know, while it's not hyper fast growth that some areas see, we are seeing growth in enrollment in that area. So we wouldn't want to build it for the number of students that there are today, which is why the task force is recommending the size of a 400 student campus at Mission Valley. I've heard the question, why Mission Valley? We have another number of campuses with needs. Absolutely, we do. We went through a prioritization exercise with the task force. Ultimately, Mission Valley came forward after Stroman as the next campus to prioritize from the task force. Largely because of aging condition. Not sure if you've had the opportunity to visit Mission Valley recently. The core facility, which is not very large, is 84 years old. The remainder of the campus is what I would call a portable city. It's all portable buildings that have been there for over 30 years, which is well beyond the lifespan of what a portable building is intended to be used, much less intended to be used as a classroom. This would allow for construction at the existing site and would provide a secure campus with modern learning environments. That's one of the major concerns that we hear about. And when we think about the Texas School Safety Center and recommended best practices for how a campus should be constructed, the way Mission Valley is constructed is absolutely the opposite direction of what we would be guided to do for best practice for campus security and safety, not only of students, but of staff as well. Under the area of priority repairs, district-wide, there are a number of categories of repairs that this proposal from the task force would address. Those include HVAC, roofing, plumbing, electrical, gas lines, accessibility, window replacement, building envelope, updates to safety and security systems across all campuses. And on a few campuses, high priority kitchen and dining replacement and high priority paving. And before I go to the next, well, I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. This slide and the following slide are going to detail per campus or facility the estimated costs for addressing these various areas. But I want to share just a little more detail than you've received previously about how we came to be here with these estimates for each campus. This wasn't throwing darts in the dark. This was a collaboration of our maintenance team leadership team, our child nutrition leadership team, our task force members, discussing priority items, looking specifically at each campus, line item by line item, what work we had already done in-house in these categories for certain campuses versus what work and what systems were at or beyond their useful life at this time. And so I know the board has been provided following our last meeting with documents and information that goes into further detail about what categories would be addressed at each elementary that were identified by our maintenance leadership team and the task force. And so in some areas, you may have a recommended roofing repair. In others, that roof has many years of useful life. And so that would not be work that would be recommended for this bond because we have a good, strong roof on a particular campus. So you'll see varying degrees of cost and varying degrees of what categories are identified to be addressed. Those categories were identified by our maintenance team in collaboration with our facilities assessment and the task force. Here we have similar information touching on our secondary campuses, our support facilities, and then in that final column, other, the campuses that were built as a part of the last bond program in 2007, there are some needs for some upgrades on the safety and security systems at those campuses. I mentioned this at the start, and I'll mention it again. We have just a plethora of information, the beginning and the end, everything in between of the bond planning task force available. And we want to encourage all our stakeholders to come to this site and check out the action on the videos and get to know the thought process behind how this recommendation came to be. I think that our task force, the members are very proud of the radical transparency and the way that they went about their work. And so encourage you to encourage others to seek these resources as they have questions about the work of the task force and how their recommendations came to be. Just as a reminder, in terms of timeframes for the board to consider as we continue this conversation about the bond recommendations from the task force, the deadline for a school board to call a bond election for May of 2021 is February 12th. That's Friday, February 12th. We have, as a leadership team, I know Dr. Shepard has identified a potential meeting date of February 9th for the board, should the board wish to consider the call of an election. Ultimately, election day for a May bond election is May the 1st, Saturday, May the 1st. Now, I've gotten to do all the talking, but certainly all the work was not done by me. We had tremendous task force members who were mentioned earlier, and thank you for Pastor Van Hook for recognizing and honoring their work once again. I appreciate that as their facilitator. We also have a number of district partners who have worked with us throughout this process and worked with our task force, and they are here tonight to assist the board with any questions that you may have around the area of their expertise. We have representatives from Hunton, Andrews, and Kurth who have served as our bond counsel. Samantha Racklin and Tom Sage are with us tonight. From Hilltop Securities, our financial advisor is Ann Berger-Intrican. Ann is available as well tonight. And then from Huckabee Architects, we have Dan Luttrell, Devin Wilson, Megan Smith, and Mike Vermeeren. And so we have folks here with a lot of expertise. It's that complicated side that we talk about. And so as the board has discussion and questions, we are here and available to provide additional information and insight.
Thank you, Dr. Bowman.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Mercer, if you're available, I cannot see all the hands for questioning. So could you help me with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you so much.
And I should add, I want to thank, I know that many of our board members have submitted questions and information to us since our last meeting. We encouraged you and appreciate, I think we got 69 total questions since last Thursday. And so I know you've received a lot of information, and a lot of those answers I hope were thorough. There's a lot to read. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to read it all, But we were talking, Dr. Shepard, myself, and some of our team about how great it would be if we can turn those questions and others that we get into a frequently asked question document so that our community can have that information at their fingertips. We've also talked about taking those questions and others and creating videos to provide information to our community through multiple streams of media to address those frequently asked questions that we know that our community members rightfully have.
I think that's a great idea, Dr. Bonewall. I really do.
Hand raised from Mr. Mansker.
Let me put my hand down so I can remember, or I think I can, whatever. Got one thing to say is that I want to be the first one to say thank you to the task force. They've done an excellent job in working through these things and coming up with a really good and credible bond proposal. I think they've done yeoman's work. And I appreciate you, Mr. Bonewall, and the rest of the administration that have done such a wonderful job. I'll be honest, I read as many of those questions as I could after work, and I don't think I got to all of them, but I did the best I could. The other thing I would like to say is that I'd like Ms. Intrican, just for the public to understand on the defeasance and how we manage bond debt, if she would speak to that as an expert, because that's a continued question from one of our community members. And if you don't mind that. And the other thing, I think as we start this off, I think the first question that should be answered by the board is this the time for a bond? And we need to have that question answered first. Okay. And then if it is, then let's move forward with the next questions. If y'all agree with me on that. I will just listen. So I've just got a little, that's my opening comment.
I can respond quickly, Ross, and start off with that question, is it time for a bond? I can't think of a better time. This is a time. And one of the reasons is that we can see the rising cost. The opportunity is there. The task force has done a great job, like you said earlier in the presentation of what we needed. And certainly I know we're in a pandemic and I realize the difficulties there, but I also see the need for our children to have facilities that will increase their learning. And that's critical. And I think this will be an ideal time for us to move forward. I would hate to see us continue to kick that can down the road and delay. And as we delay, the costs increase. And it gets to a point where if we bring it to the public, the numbers will be so high that immediately it'll be discouragement. And that's my opinion.
I do have a hand for Mr. Baldwin, but I believe, Mr. Mansker, you asked a question to Ms. Intrican. Did I butcher that?
Yes, sir.
Did I-
No, you did
Yes,
great.
I apologize. I jumped in.
That's okay.
No, sir.
Just so that we can get clarity for the public.
Yes, sir. Well, Honorable President, members of the board, Dr. Shepard, Dr. Bonewall, thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this meeting this evening and having the honor of working with Victoria ISD for decades. If we want to talk a little bit about refinancings, I went back and actually researched that in anticipation of some of the questions. We have helped Victoria ISD with a total of 7 refinancings of bond issues since we have worked with the district. 1 in the mid 80s and 2 in the 1990s. But what I'll do is I'll focus on the 4 that we have done since 2002. If we did a refinancing in 2002, 2005, 2014, and 2016. And when we aggregate all of those refinancings that we have done over time on a present value basis, we have helped the district in saving over $27,255,000 in debt service. What I'd like to highlight the most is the most significant of those refinancings occurred in 2014 and 2016. And in those two refinancings alone, we assisted the district in saving over $25.465 million. In addition to taking advantage of opportunities to refinance your outstanding debt for debt service savings, relative to some of the excess tax collections, we assisted Victoria ISD in 2019 in utilizing some of the balance in the interest and sinking fund in order to I think the term that should have been referenced earlier is called defease, or to redeem outstanding debt. And the debt that we helped to defease was in the principal amount of $13,190,000. And by effectuating that defeasance, Victoria ISD saved over $6.1 million in interest cost over the life of that bond issue. So when we aggregate the refundings that we have done, and we've assisted VISD since 2002, and we include the defeasance that was undertaken in 2019, on an aggregate basis, the savings are over $33 million. That is one of the things that we have assisted in doing, not only to help save debt service, but that has also assisted in creating some capacity in the future, which we are utilizing as part of the analysis for this task force recommendation for proposed bond issue. I hope that helped to answer your question.
Yeah, can I have a follow-up? One is, it's a common practice for school boards to do defeasance and to restructure debt in order to save the taxpayers that type of money. So if I'm wrong, I think it's about 32 million total that we save the taxpayers in interest on that. And
Yes,
the other thing that's important, we wouldn't even have the ability to discuss a bond at this time if we had not taken those actions. And that is the reason we did that. So to me, it's kind of like almost a Dave Ramsey thing. If is pay off your debt and get it down is what we've been trying to do. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That is very accurate. Victoria ISD has always been very proactive and forward-thinking relative to managing its debt service. And so the district has always challenged us as your financial advisor to make sure we are watching for opportunities in the market to be able to achieve debt service savings, which we have done, and to be able to utilize some of the excess tax collections to be able to pay off debt early, which just creates additional capacity in the future to fund these many projects that Dr. Bonewall outlined earlier this evening.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Ms. Intrican. That was very nice to do. I hope that helps the public understand that because it's hard sometimes to get your head around that. I'm not a financial person, so coming from an expert is much better than coming from Ross. So I appreciate that.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'll listen to the rest of the board.
Mr. Baldwin?
Thank you so much. And I do appreciate your comments, ma'am. And I do have just quick questions, but I want to start with saying thank you to Dr. Bonewall and everyone. There's just a lot of information that's been done. And I think we've done a lot of assessments. I think, honestly, we still have a little bit more to go. But always the same question that I shared earlier is, the first and foremost is, when is the optimal time for passing the chance for passing a bond? And secondly, what is the optimal amount? And as we've been presented, there's several different, the totals of the buildings, there's the repairs, and there's playgrounds, etc. And I think those two correlate with one another. Let's be a little bit exaggerative. If we were to say we have $1 million bond, I think people say it's now is the time, it's a no-brainer. On the controversy, if we were to say it's extraordinarily large, there should be a lot of due diligence. And so with that question, ma'am, I wanted to ask you on the defense, have we realized or captured any of that defense that was done in 2019? And second question to that is, did we do a defense for the first bond in 2017?
So yes, you have already realized savings for the defeasance that was undertaken in 2019. When we did that defeasance, that immediately created, and I have the numbers in front of me, and pardon me, I've got a larger screen and I'm looking at that so I can make sure I give you the correct numbers. With that particular defeasance, the district started realizing immediately about $412,187 a year every single year between now and 2036. And then you have greater savings in 37 and 38 because that's where the principal was. You did not have enough money to pay off the entire amount of the 2016 bonds. So what we did was we took the amount that was identified as being excess available revenues, and we defeased as much principal as we could. And so we picked the principal in the furthest out maturities in 2037 and in 2038. And so you will have significant reduction in your debt service in those years because the principal is paid off as well as the interest. But between now and then, yes, sir, you do get the benefit of the $412,187 a year.
Okay, and so we've just started capturing. We haven't captured the 30 million that you projected because it goes all the way through 2038. Is that fair?
Oh, yes, sir. So when we do the refinancings, the debt service savings go out through the entire life of the bond issue. But the figure that I gave you, especially related to the refinancings that were done in 2014 and 2016 of the $25.5 million, those are present value savings. So we calculated those savings in the dollars in 2014 and 2016.
And can you answer the question why did we? I don't think we did in 2017 enact the defeasance.
You did not have sufficient excess tax collections at that time to be able to warrant undertaking a defeasance.
Next question for you before I let you go, and then I give my answer to Ross's question on movement, is we have two other bonds currently that we still need to service. One is rather large, of over 100 million, I believe 110, and the smaller one at around 5 million. Is that correct? Or please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, sir. Right now you have an aggregate of 110,800,000 in debt outstanding, although you do have a principal payment on February 15th. And after February 15th, the principal outstanding will be 106,050,000. So that is approximately right. You've got about 105 million on the 16 bonds and a little over 5 million on the 14 bonds.
Okay. So one of the things I'd like to do before I answer the question is I would like to definitely make sure that we hear from our most senior board members, particularly Dr. De Los Santos. I know you have many, many years of experience, and Stroman is one of the places that's being concerned. But I have some questions with regards to timing, as I mentioned, in the amount. I'm not so sure that we're clear on the amounts. I know we've been put forward 3 of them, but I'm still not sure that we're clear on whether that's going to be a menu or a total in the bond proposal. And I again say that we have less than 100 days. And as I know from campaign experience, it takes a long time to get the message correct. And more importantly, that we have a vision of how this bond will impact. I also believe that, as Dr. Shepard, I think rightly said, that we want to own this bond, and we want the community to know, and through ownership, that we have a solid plan to move forward and how that's going to impact our plans and visions. You know, one of the things that came out in the survey was the most doubt was about planning. I think that's lacking, and I know that I've received a lot of questions. And finally, my comment is we have 3 situations that we are facing as a nation. We have some new administration, and we have, unfortunately, if we were to go the February 9th meeting, that's the beginning of a impeachment trial that shows uncertainty. We have also an economy that's unfortunately at almost double of our normal unemployment rate. I believe it is 8.9%. We have folks that are hurting because they can't collect on rent because we've had some evacuation orders that have been ceased. And it's unfortunately, that's revenue that some of the folks would have about payment for taxes. And finally, I think obviously we're in COVID, and I know that there was some lessons that a lot of people will say that we've learned, hopefully from Harvey and the timing of the 2017 bond that we attempted to pass. And so there's a lot of other questions that I have. And frankly, I feel that given that situation, some of these questions that haven't been answered, particularly in the vision of some of the outcomes, I'm a little bit concerned that we're just premature. And so I want to leave this question also just with my fellow board members. And I know there's some unclarity about it. And so I think at some point we have to answer these questions. If the bill is if the bond is passed, when does billing go out for this new amount? When does payment start being accepted, and when is payment deadline? Do we have any opportunity for other dates for this bond, whether they be November of this year, which by the way is a non-election year, or even later? I, like everybody, want the best new buildings, want to attract industry, want to attract people to come to our school, be back to the enrollments that we used to have. But let's face it, we can have the best house, we can build the best facilities, but it's all about achievement. And I think that's what we've always said we're about, is student achievement. And now in today's society, a lot about safety. So I, at this point, am open, but if I had to say yes or no to move forward, I think it's premature and there's not enough time. And I want us to craft and develop a good message from the work that we had, have all those 60+ questions answered so that we can confidently go to the public. And I'll defer to my other colleagues, and especially my senior colleague, Dr. De Los Santos. Thank you.
I do not see Dr. De Los Santos's hand up at this time, but I do see Mrs. Keeling's hand up. And before you start, Brett, is there any way I can get you to lower your hand unless you want to talk again and then just. All right, perfect.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
No problem.
Stella, I didn't know if you were trying to get your hand up or you were just thinking. I'll be happy to wait until you speak if you'd like for me to.
Ah, there's Dr. De Los Santos's hand.
I'll wait.
Okay. Dr. De Los Santos?
Okay, as Reverend Van Hook said, we kicked the can down the road 4 years ago, and the buildings are older. The costs have gone up. So in my opinion, we need to move on a bond. We need the money. We don't know what the state's going to do. We've got to pay our bills. We've got to pay our teachers. We need this bond money to help us pay the maintenance costs and hopefully free up some money that we can give to our employees. So in my opinion, we need to move forward with the bond proposal.
Mrs. Keeling?
Well, I want to first thank Kevin, President Van Hook, for starting the meeting with a thank you. I think Dr. Shepherd always does a really good thing, and that is starting in with thank you. And so thank you for starting us off that way, as well as every other board member who's spoken, thanking the task force and the administration facilitating that discussion. And so thank you to all of you, as well as to those present who supported the work of the task force, and to Ms. Berger Intrican for being here. Very much appreciate you taking on those answers. And it's been a pleasure over the years to have financial advisors that keep an eye out for the district. And while I know that there may be some who may not agree with the method of management, I am 100% confident that we have done good management, excellent management, and that there is no deception or anything wrong, materially wrong, with what we have done over the years in managing the debt. So I want to thank you for, as Mr. Mansker said, giving us an expert opinion, and thank you for keeping it simple so that our public can understand. I think Mr. Mansker, you laid out the questions pretty well, and I don't want to take a ton of time because I also want to listen. But when I thought about tonight, I really thought about several things. One, and so I sort of put them in questions, and for me, I always start with why. And when I think about this proposal and the why, I know that the needs of the district are great. They're urgent, as Dr. De Los Santos and President Van Hook have pointed out. Their deferring is making those needs more costly and more difficult to service, if we can service them at all. And so I think the proposal addresses the priority needs. The task force has done a beautiful job. And I think it very much addresses safety and security, high concern, as well as supports the findings and directions of the community in terms of instruction and vision for our students being on their own path, in their own place, at their own pace, and that choice and opportunity to fit those unique needs of every student. And I thank you for fleshing that out, Dr. Bonewall, because I think that's a very important part of not just the buildings, but how the buildings support the findings and directions for student learning. When I think about how, and what we're here to talk about tonight as well in the description of the meeting is really the process. And I really feel like designing our future together defines Victoria ISD. We as a board passed a resolution that these were the sorts of the way we were going to have community making decision process. And it's, you know, when I think about it, it's easy to have a one-faceted approach. It's hard to have a multifaceted conversation with each part of that having, in my mind, a role, right? The task force is representative of the community. The board has a responsibility to do its due diligence and hear the recommendation of the task force. And then I think the community at large has a role to play, because what I'm looking for in the process, and I guess, you know, the question in my mind is, what I see us doing in designing our future together is looking at needs, wants, and the input from task force, which is excellent. We honor that input and that work, how our community feels, and what the board's thoughts are. And that between all three of those, we're going to find the pathway that fits best for us all together. And so when it comes to time, one of the questions I have is, do we have the ability to get what I think we like to call feed forward, right? Which way are we going to go from the community on what they think about this? And then come back together, maybe as a board or as a task force, and have more discussion so that we customize this for the community. I'm not sure if there's time to do that. I am somewhat find myself, I'm just going to speak for myself, challenged at during COVID, even though I have, we've gotten the full facilities report as a board. We've been through that report. I have been through that as well as attending some of the virtual presentations. And I know the task force did walkthroughs. But it's a little difficult to have community conversations. Thank heavens for thought exchange, because we're not able to be together. And I think somewhat, more challenging even to just have a conversation like this remotely. I very much like listening to the community, and I know that there are people who like to attend school board meetings and listen to the comments and be a little more interactive with the board than a remote meeting. But we're not going to be able to have a big community meeting in the, say, community center dome, because right now that's where we are vaccinating our population for COVID. And it's not safe for us to have a big meeting like that. So thank heavens for thought exchange and the ability to gather that input. I know that's sort of rambling, but we have a big discussion before us tonight. So bear with me here, I'm wrapping up. The other thing I thought about was what? That's a little bit more specific. And so I'm gonna sort of hold on to that. Although I also want to thank Dr. Bonewald for fleshing out some of the what for the community and explaining that the total cost is not just the cost of the building, it's demolition, it's fixtures, desks. So, that was, I think, really helpful for the community when we talk about what we're doing. The big question, and the one that Ross asked us to address first, is the one I'm going to address last. And that is about time, or the way I had it on my paper is when. And there are some positives on time in my mind. One, rates on bond are excellent. It's a good time to go out into the bond market. Second, the task force and financial advisors and working with them, as well as working with the architects, have, I think, brought together a good long-range plan, which the community has asked us to bring to them. In other words, a workable plan, as I understand it, where if we were to bring forward the proposal as is and put it to a vote, we are continually building the capacity to address facilities in the future without an additional tax increase. And while they would have to approve the issuance of the debt, we're able to take advantage of a market now that gives us a good, solid, long-range plan. Yes. The things on time, which some have mentioned, it's COVID. There's some economic uncertainty. I'm not going to be insensitive to that. But the final thing about time that really is in my head is, one, do we have to have the time to have the conversation that I think we need to have so that together we can be successful? And second, no matter what's happening, our district keeps moving forward. And I want the conversation with the community to keep moving forward. You know, we're not sitting because of COVID, not doing work. We're not sitting still. We continue to move forward. And I think that's very much seen in the rollout of the new PTEC, the parent nights that are now, the approval of the Childhood Learning Institute. We're waiting on that. I mean, you have secured grants for instructional programming. So the district keeps moving. We aren't putting off other work. And so the question to me is, do we put off facilities? And that is where I want more feedback, not just from the board, but from the community at large. And then depending on what the rest of the board says, I would also like to hear some from Mr. Sage and sorry, on the list of names, I'm not sure who else is bond counsel with Mr. Sage, on you know, what are maybe possible alternatives to bond proposals. So that's where I am. I'm listening, and I would like to continue a discussion with the community.
Can I ask a question for clarification? I'm not sure I fully understand. In terms of the timing for potentially calling a bond now, or discussion with the community with the potential of calling for a bond at a later date?
I think they're tied, right?
Okay.
And that's the reason I want to hear from a larger community, because I think the time might be right for something, and it might be this task force proposal. I'm not saying it's not. I don't know the answer to that, because I think it's a broader community discussion.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Ms. Pruitt, did you want to speak to it? Gotcha.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself first.
I hear you.
So my thing is, Ross is asked about, is it the time? You know, when we did our last bond and it failed, we were getting so much more for so much less money. Building a school has almost doubled in price since the last time the bond came up. And I think that if we continue to kick the can down the road, how much more expensive is that going to get? Is it going to be at a point where we're not going to be able to even afford to think about that, where our taxes are going to have to go way, way up rather than, you know, significantly rather than just a little at this time? That's my concern. My concern is that a few years back, it was about 18-20 million to build a new school, and it's almost 40 million now. I mean, that's a huge difference in construction, you know, constructing a new a rebuild of that. And it's just going to get, in my opinion, it's just going to get more expensive. And so then if we don't do it now, what happens then? If we don't say yes to the bond at this time and we wait another year, what if it's 60 million to build an elementary school? What if it's 100 million to build a middle school? Then what are we going to do? What happens to our schools? What happens to those high priority that we have at the schools? How much more expensive is that going to get? That's my concern, at least now at this time. I don't feel like what the bond or the bond task force brought to us is unreasonable. They've been out in the community, talking to the community. I know Bethany Castro and Justin Urbano talked a lot about, they talked to a lot of the community, Southside Coalition. So a lot of what they're saying in those 40 hours that I watched is that the community is saying, we want Stroman to get rebuilt. And in my opinion, they deserve that. You know, that school, I don't know how long it's been since you guys have been there, but when I was there, it was raining in the cafeteria. That's not fair to those children. You know, can you really put a price on their education and them feeling good about going to a school that the community cares about them? If the community won't invest in itself, how can we ask other people to invest in us, other economic developments that come to look at us? I mean, you know, this is an investment in not just Victoria, but our students. It's really important to be able to see those children and then be happy to be at school and have that technology, have those advantages that will come with a new rebuild at Stroman. I know a lot of the Mission Valley people said, oh, well, we love our outdoors. We love, you know, being outside and walking out and in the sun and things like that. But a lot of them did say about safety and security. And that's important to them. They're out there in the open, you know, so they're concerned about that. So a rebuild for that is, I feel like, on point. And again, the bond task force is built from community members. It's gone out to the community to ask questions and ask them, and is had those conversations, I feel like, on a greater level than we think that they have, just from the conversations that I heard in the meetings and things. So, I mean, I feel like it now is a good time, and that if we wait, what's going to happen to those schools? How are we going to be able to fix them or do something with them in the years to come? So I feel like it's important to do that, to show our community that we care about our students, that we care about their education, that we are fully invested in. For me, $6.25 a month added to my taxes is worth my students at Stroman Elementary getting a brand new school. Thank you.
Can I
Yeah, Mrs.
interrupt
Brooks.
just a second real quick? Mike, can we hear from you before you hit all the rest?
I was just about to give my 2 cents before I picked up another hand. And Ms. Keeling, I noticed your hand is still up. Do you want to make a comment again later, or it's okay? Okay. All right. So a lot of really good points. The what? All right. I think we covered that on Thursday night. I personally think the what is great. I think there was a lot of thought put into this. I think the task force did go out into the community, like Ms. Pruitt said a while ago. I think there was a lot of talk, and they dealt with absolute definite needs. One of the 69 questions was asked is, how does this fit into our strategic plan? How does this fit into our pathways? And I think the answer that Dr. Shepard provided was wonderful, and I can't wait till that's made public, because it literally is the lengthiest response to any of the questions, and I think for a very good reason. I think the what of the bond is solid. It's hard because there are no architects involved. We can't show you a model of what it's going to look like, and we know that everybody's going to have 1,000,000,001 different opinions about what the front door color is and the whole 9 yards. We can't show you that kind of things right now because we haven't moved past that. But the what is solid. I really believe in the what. Timing. And this is a question for one of you guys. The bond where we built the 4 new schools, the high schools, the junior high, or actually 5 new schools and the 2 elementaries. What was the total of that bond? Y'all remember?
169, I think.
169 bought us 5 schools. Margaret makes an incredibly good point. We're talking about 2 schools for almost $100 million when we got 5 for 160. So the cost in that period of time, and that's been what, 11 years since that bond, 11, 12 years since that bond was passed. So, you know, we're dealing with more than just geometric increases in cost. So I think that we have to be good stewards. We have to look at it from the standpoint is, yes, that's $6.25. While it may not be a problem for me, may really be an issue for a small business in this town at this point in time. I think we have to be cognizant of that, but I also have to think to myself that $6.25 now will get me what possibly $12 is going to get me 5 years from now. It's tough. I mean, it's really hard. And I guess that's why we're here, is to give our opinion on these hard issues, on these complex and somewhat complicated things. If we delay, I wouldn't want to delay long. I mean, I totally get the point about getting public comment. I think that is incredibly important. I want buy-in from the community. I don't want a 51% margin to pass a bond. I want it to be an overwhelming percentage. I want the entire community to stand up and say, this is exactly what we want. This is the direction we want to move. We know that this is going to build our community. This is going to build our future. This is going to build businesses within this town, and this is going to bolster our area. I don't want a 51% margin. So I do think that the time frame that we're dealing with, and I realize I'm jumping all over the place, but I'm getting there, I promise. The time frame that we're dealing with between now and February 9th on calling for a bond, the limited amount that we're going to be able to get out into the community and talk to each and every single one of these little nooks and crannies, whether it's PTOs, whether it's homeowners associations, or anyone else who would have us come and speak to the accuracy and the validity of the bond. I just don't think we have the time to do that right now. I don't think do I think we could probably pass a bond? Yeah, honestly, I do. But I just don't think in this short period of time that we're going to get that overwhelming response that I think we really need to unify this community behind this. Because this, you know, we've lived in a partisan world for the last, for the last well over a year. It's been almost toxic. And I don't feel good moving forward with something unless I feel like the community has had a really good chance to speak about it and talk about it. Again, I'm not talking about pushing it off 2 years. I'm not talking about pushing it off 5 years in any way, shape, or form, because the needs are just simply too great. The questions in the public comments I thought were fair, and I thought they were good questions. And the reason I thought they were good questions is because we need to know why we do what we do. And because of the refinance, which I assume is the same thing as refunded, am I correct on that? The language? Can Ms.
No.
Intrican?
We get refunded. We refinance some and we defeat some.
Okay, all right. Well, I'd seen refunded in one of the answers, so it just might have been a deal. But I believe that the steps that have been taken over the years, through the 80s, the 90s, and then the big ones post 02, I think it's got us in a position to where we could go to the taxpayers and say, we can give you $157 million of improvements to the facilities for 6.25 cents or 6.75 cents. I think that's great. I think that was a good job. So I appreciate the questions coming from community. And the reason I appreciate them is because it gives us a chance to build trust. It gives us a chance to say, hey man, we're not trying to deceive you. We want to explain it to you. I get as confused with acronyms and percentages as the average Joe on the street. So, you know, but I'm in a position where I get to ask those questions on a regular basis, and a lot of those guys aren't. Thought exchange is phenomenal and wonderful, but there is a segment of our population who, for one reason or another, have difficulty responding on thought exchange, either a language barrier or a technology barrier or something else. It's a wonderful tool, but I don't think it's the end all be all of community response. So my 2 cents, Ross, is I want this bond. But I feel better about it being pushed maybe to November.
Can I speak?
I think Mr. Baldwin had his hand up.
We haven't heard from Ross yet as far as whether he thinks we should go now or wait. So I'd actually like to hear from him if possible.
Yeah, I haven't given my opinion, but I was going to do that. I just asked the question. So here's what we have facing us. We have more restrictions going on to oil and gas, which is a significant part. If you saw the appraisal board, Mr. Mercer and Ms. Pruitt, of our tax base. We have COVID, and Ms. Keeling has said that. We've had the Texas legislators are in session, and I hope they do their part to fund education and fund any increases in enrollment, not just fund at current levels. That's another thing that we've got to watch in the process. I think that the board has had an excellent proposal by some very intelligent, smart, and gifted people on this task force. And I say that with all honesty. All the people on the task force are that and more. And I think we do a dishonor to them if we push this down the road too far. I really do. If the board chooses, I think that we as a board should say, if you don't want to do it right now, that you're committed to doing it in November, because you can't push any further than that. And I would like to hear from the bond guys to let us know, Mr. Sage and those, I would like to hear from them to let us know what they project the bond rates possibly doing at that time. They're going to have a better pulse on that than the rest of us. But we have, I'll give you an example of the inequity in our schools. And as many of you know, I went to these schools. I went to Mitchell and then Paywelder and then at Victoria High School. And I went to some of our poor schools. And some of the facilities I went to were in need of repair then. Okay, and that's been a long time ago. Trust me, I'm old. So that is the fact. So right now we have on the east side of town and on the south side of town, you cannot go to some of our best facilities. They're mostly on the west and northwest side of town. Shalimar, Vickers are well-maintained schools. Shalimar's new and Vickers has been well-maintained. And Chandler is the more recent build. Okay, so if you're on that side of town and you have a kid, and let's say you live in, I don't know, we can just pick anywhere, Woodway, you can go to a brand new school, another brand new school or a recent build in Cave, and then west. If you live in Tanglewood, or let's say Deer Chase, okay, let's use Deer Chase. You're going to go to Smith, which is leaks like a sieve. I've been over there. It's terrible. Then you're going to go, I believe they go to Howell, which is a very old school also, and finally to East, which is a new school. So the inequity in the system is, it depends on where you live and what you see. You know, and then if you're on the south side of town, we can go there. It's terrible. You don't hit a new school till you hit a high school unless you go to Torrance. So we don't spend our tax dollars. I'm really want to make sure that I know the task force did that. It looks like a pretty good split between East and West and North and South. I think they did a good job looking at the poverty level. But the kids, all of our children need to have good schools. And I really will say to you this, you know, I can go either way, but I will not leave tonight if we do not have a commitment to go in November. Because any later than that, and I think we do a disservice to our community. I actually would love to go now, and I think we need to do a lot of stuff. But if the board, we got to go as a board with 100%. I really believe that in order to get this through, because it's going to take all of us, especially if we go in May bond. We're going to have 100% of the board do this. And I've been on the board a long time, and it breaks my heart when I see kids not have the facilities they need. But we're going to have to be real judicious. And I understand COVID, the legislators. I even understand Mr. Baldwin's point about a new administration. We don't know which way that's going either yet. He's just been in office. Mr. Biden's only been in office a few days. So you really don't know. So we got to give everybody a chance. So my opinion is, if we do decide, and I haven't made my final decision, but if we do decide to do that, that we have a commitment as a board that in November of this next year, that bond will be called. Because that gives the community plenty of time. I'm just telling you, that gives you 6 months time. And it's going to cost more, okay, if we wait, if we delay. But there are struggling businesses, there's struggling homeowners, and there's people out there right now that I see in the office sometimes who can't even afford for a $75,000 house, $4.69 a month right now because of they've lost their job. So we need to keep that in mind. And so that's what I'd like y'all to discuss, if that's even a possibility. Thank you.
Could I
Mr.
jump
Baldwin.
in and just, could I jump in first and just make a couple of quick comments? So we did hear from everyone. I was trying to keep tally and notes as we were going through. As it stands, there were 3 who were feeling in favor potentially of the timing being right for this. There were 2 who were not in favor, timing not feeling right for this, and 2 who were on the fence either way. Some hesitation about going now, but some hesitation about waiting, and not really landed on what's best. I would call it undecided. I agree 100% with what Ross said, that we need to be unified as a team of 8. It's really a team of 100,000 by the time we get to the end of this. That we've all got to be on the same page moving forward. And I'm also just leadership orientation. You know, everyone, I mean this when I say this, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. People are not entitled to their own facts. That's why we put every fact out there, every single one of them, everything. Radically transparent means insane levels of accessibility to both information and to people. And that's how we make sure everybody has the same facts, but everybody should have their own opinion. And so I think I just want to pause for a moment here and honor that, and thank you, trustees, for speaking your heart and speaking your opinion on the matter. And then maybe before we jump to the other hands, I would defer to you, President Van Hook, about how you would like to proceed.
Thank you, sir. I would like to get the clarity that we need, the original question by Ross, as we talk about moving forward. Those 2 that were on the fence have to give us some information to move forward for May or November. I mean, because all of this will be in vain if we continue on, if we're looking at the board saying go in November. And so we need that clarity, and we need that clarity tonight. And so those 2 that I'd like to hear back from them to give us those time periods of when they think we should move forward.
Do you want to identify the 2 that were on the fence, Dr. Shepard, so they can respond?
I think it was
Sure.
Tammy and Ross.
That's right, Tammy and Ross.
Okay, make sure. I think Miss Keeling has had her hand up for out of those 2. I will get to you, Mr. Baldwin. We're just going to let them answer Mr. Van Hook. Miss Keeling.
I love this big screen, but finding the unmute is sometimes a challenge. I've really been looking forward to this discussion, and I absolutely, there are lots of things that have been said that I agree with completely. The equity piece that Mr. Mansker is talking about, the needs, the more expensive later, all of those things are true, and I don't discount them for one moment. I also believe that the task force has brought us their best work, and personally, I do not have an issue with the proposal that they've come to us. I couldn't support it. What I think I'm asking the board to consider, I'm not saying not now. I'm saying I want to hear from our community on whether or not this proposal might be tweaked, or whether or not it's got the support of the community, the larger community at this time, to go forward. and get some feedback there. I'm also not certain, for example, that while me personally, I think the proposal is spot on. I like playgrounds. I think that for some, they might be asking, I could support this if you could pare it down. And I think we should take that into consideration. I'm not saying the task force didn't do a great job. I'm just saying that if you are asking up or down for right now, I can't tell you without hearing more from our community. And I'm not sure that, I know thought exchange is great. I hear you, Mike. I mean, it's COVID. We're not going to be able to go everywhere in 2 weeks and have all the discussions we need to have. Thank you to the people who have already reached out to a board member and said what they feel, because it's helped us form questions and do our due diligence. So, what I'm saying is, I don't know that there's not something that we might be able to do now. I'm just not sure that I'm 100% sure that I'm confident that we've heard enough from the community to know what it is. And what's most important to me is that we move forward together as a community and are successful as a community. As Mike said, I don't want to win by one vote. I want to have broad, knock the ball out of the park. We are moving on, and it's tough, but this is the way we as a community has decided to tackle it. Task force, fantastic. Thank you to everyone who served. You can't really have a task force of hundreds of people. And I think we had a good job of having a representative task force. And I think they have talked to some people. But for me personally, it's not quite enough yet. And if the time doesn't allow for us to have that conversation, I think we could have that sort of conversation between now and the next opportunity, however soon that is, to have a bond on the ballot. But that's the conversation I really, really want to hear. And if we can have that conversation in the next 2 weeks and make a decision on February 9th, I'm all for it, because we just don't stop, coming to some decision. I would really like to hear from bond counsel on whether or not, unless the board just does not wish to talk about anything other than one proposal, I would like to talk about the possibility of, or maybe we just wait till we get more feedback, or decide we don't want any more feedback and wait. I'm not sure, but I think the proposals could be split. And I just think there's a path. And then one other quick thing, we've all talked about, and we know about some of the really dire needs that we see in our facilities. Leaking pipes, not functioning kitchens, things that just have to be addressed. There's no denying them, and there's no denying they're going to be more expensive later. But there's a middle between dire and new school. And I know the task force did their work on where is that breaking point where it costs more to remodel than it does to build a new. And I've looked at those numbers, I've listened to their conversations, and I think they've done a good job. But if the difference maker in getting a successful bond was the community feels like they could support you if you drop the playgrounds, would we be willing to do it? I don't know. That's what's in my head, a broader discussion. I love playgrounds, and but I'm more concerned about the time playing outside and getting the needs that we have, the urgent needs that we have met now.
Mr. Mansker.
can I have the bond people give us some type of idea what the bond rates will be before I say what I need to say?
Sure. This is Tom Sage, Bond Counsel. I'll let Ann talk about rates. I was trying to respond to Ms. Keeling's comments. Two things. Number one, on timing. I think this is an outstanding discussion. I always think of timing issues for bond elections. It's kind of like having children. There was never a good time for us to have children, and yet I have 4 of them. And it all seemed to work out. So it's a little bit the same in that there will never be a perfect time for you to call a bond election. We will be facing different challenges and different situations in November as we are now. And the school district has been around for almost 100 years. You've had bonds from time to time, and you need facilities. And so generally, I try to let that guide the discussion. Secondarily, on bond propositions, school districts, I mean, my job I kind of see is to help you get the bond election passed. And so my advice to you is to take the advantages you have in getting it passed, which is school districts, because they are a unified enterprise, have the opportunity to vote their bonds together in a single proposition. You can't have high schools without middle schools. You can't have elementary schools without school buses. You can't have, so all the parts have to work together. You can't vote one without the other and for the entire system to work. And so because of that, the legislature has given school districts, you know, except for certain ancillary projects, the ability to vote these bonds together. And my advice is generally to take that, unless you have an extremely politically polarizing project, something that is very, very high risk, and you might want to peel it off. And I'll defer to y'all for that. But my understanding of your bond plan is that it is a unified bond plan. We're making renovations in places that we need to make renovations. We are demolishing and replacing facilities where you are spending millions and millions of dollars in upkeep every year, and it all seems to work together. Playgrounds notwithstanding, it seems to be a set of projects that lends itself to a single proposition. With that, I'll hand it off to Ann and let her talk about rates.
Great, thank you, Tom. Mr. Mansker, what I think is important and what I can talk about is what we know the interest rates are today. And back to one of the comments that Ms. Keeling made earlier is right now we know that we are at historical lows. When one of the indices that we look at is called the Bond Buyers Index. It's an index that comes out every Thursday. And while it is not the exact interest rate that VISD would get, when we go back and we look at the 25-year history, there have been points in time where the BBI was over 6%. The number right now, the most current number that we have, it's a 2.21. And we are just within probably about 15 or so basis points from a historical low. And that historical low goes back before or goes back after the 25 years. We really are talking about some of the lowest interest rates that we have experienced in the market since the early 1960s. Now, the second part of your question is far more challenging. I have no ability to predict what interest rates are going to be next week, much less what they might be if you decide to have your election later this year. A couple of things to think about. If you have a May election, most of our clients that we work with choose to issue bonds that are passed at a May election in about the middle of August, closing in September. So you actually have a pretty narrow duration between when the bond election passes and when you would issue bonds. What is interesting is if you have a November election, there is a 30-day contest period for which you cannot issue bonds. And then having a GO bond election in December actually has some cost to it just because of the timing for when the interest payments are made. So generally, we do not recommend, if you have a November election, to actually issue the bonds until January. So we're looking about 1 year out. Now, having said that, the FOMC and the Feds have been very vocal about not believing that we would expect to see interest rates, the Fed funds rate, change really out to about 2022 or 2023. But having said that, I do want to highlight that the Feds is a short-term rate, and we're looking at issuing long-term bonds with a 30-year amortization. And the back end of the interest rates is generally determined by what the expectations are for inflation. So it's very challenging to, even though we know what may be happening on the front end of the yield curve, it is a little bit challenging for us to make an estimate as to what the interest rates might be a year from now out over a 30-year duration. I apologize. I know I didn't really answer your question very well, but that's the bulk of the information that I really have at this particular time.
Okay, so I will tell you, you answered my question extremely well, because what I know is that it's almost impossible to come up with the bond rates at this point. This is historical lows. For that reason, I think we have an opportunity here to really go out for a bond. My issue is we've got to go out unified. I would vote for the bond if everybody would agree to vote for May. But I've heard two members who are basically opposed to the bond, is the way I understand it. So if we go 5-2, then it's a problem, because
Trustee Mansker, could I jump in? I'm gonna interrupt you for just a quick second. I don't think I heard the other trustees say that they're against the bond. They're not for it. I think they're not for the timing, is what.
That's what I'm saying.
I just want to be clear on that point.
Right. No, none of the trustees are against the bond, but against the timing of the bond. This is what I'm saying. So I'm hearing what they're saying, and I'm offering their compromise to November. But I think Ms. Pruitt, Dr. De Los Santos, and Reverend Van Hook were very articulate and were very much correct. We have kicked the can down the road. Not only the board since I've been on, but the boards previous to that. And we have let our facilities deteriorate to the point where we're in a really bad position as far as what's going on, what our children need, what we need to do all these innovations, the P-TECH programs, all these things that we're trying to do. We don't even have enough plugs, as Reverend Greer said, to handle the electronics the kids need today. So I'm, if we're not going to get unity, then I would say let's wait till November. But if we're going to get unity, if everybody would agree to do it in May, I would go and agree to do it in May also. But that's my issue. It's not that I'm opposed to the bond. I think the task will do an excellent job. It's great work. We have in our playgrounds, I know I've had a few questions about that, but in our schools that have real active PTOs, a lot more school money together, their playgrounds are in much better shape than our more poverty schools that have a higher degree of poverty, because the money's just not there. So that is an equity issue. And if you look at even the playground at, this is in defense of the playgrounds, even the playground at Mission Valley, you can't get a wheelchair in there. And as a physical therapist, every child should be able to get on that playground. That's only fair, because play is so important to a social, emotional, and physical well-being of a child. It's essential. So we have to have wheelchair accessibility on each one of those playgrounds. And I don't think we take that out as a separate issue. And if people aren't willing to look at that as a necessity, I wish they could just spend time with a child who doesn't have access to it and really would want to go out there. And then I think their heart would change. But you got to have a heart for the children, and you also have to have a mind for the taxpayer. And I understand that. That's the reason why I want unity from the board before we go out. So if we can come to a consensus on May 1st, I will vote for it. But if we can't, I will not leave here until we get a commitment to a November bond.
When you say not leave here, you mean this Zoom call?
Yeah, I'm gonna stay forever.
You're gonna stay on Zoom all day, right? All right.
We need to get something done.
President Van Hook, Mr. Baldwin has had his hand raised for some time.
Okay,
Thank you so much. And Ross, I want to say, and really everybody, some great comments. Been one that I hadn't, thought about too tremendously, but I appreciate the comments so much is the legislature. Man, I hope that they give us a lot more than they've done in the past. And so that's a great point. But here's some of the questions that I have for our experts to help us maybe all have a little more clarity. It's on the rates, and then it's on the cost drivers for construction. I don't have a lot of experience with the construction, but I have a little bit, and I know that there are ways to combat cost drivers. So the first question I have is actually for the rates. I did a little bit of BBI research on my own, and I look back and just to get perspective. Hindsight doesn't always predict, but if you go a longer period over time, that dip comes a lot less of a dramatic dip. And no doubt we are at all-time lows, but I looked at it and I saw from 2000 that we hovered around the 5% or less. And more specifically, when we had our bond that we did the last time, we were still in that 4%. So that's encouraging for me. And so my first question is, am I correct or am I off on that? Because I looked at I went back to 1970 on the BBI, and maybe you don't have that information, but I think at some point we need to consider it. So if you have the answer, I'd love it. And then the second one again is to talk to the architects and say, what are the cost drivers that's really driving? Are those things that we could better negotiate, better look at, better resource? Or is it that we are just so innovative in our STEM building that these are unprecedented times as far as the innovations that we need that are driving those costs as opposed to labor and materials? Thank you.
And again, a question for clarification. This is to help inform your decision about the timing of the bond. Is that right, Trustee Baldwin?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I am happy to send you a graph that we have prepared that goes back 25 years. And if you'd like to go back since the BBI has been in place, we're happy to provide that for you. Interest rates have been dynamic. There have been a lot of economic events over time that have caused interest rates to go up and down. I think if we go back to about the middle of 2018, the BBI was actually about a 4.25. And then we have just seen since that point in time a significant drop in interest rates. If we go back to about 2015, they were probably in around a 3.25 range. If we go back to 2010, they were closer to the 4% range. In 2005, they were probably 4.5. And in 2000, they were right at about 5%. So the chart I have goes up and down, and it reflects all the various movements and economic events over time that have caused rates to go up and down. But those are a couple of points in time to put in perspective what the BBI was.
Thank you. And those are always generally correlating with the stock market, correct?
Not always. Sometimes when the stock market goes down, we actually see improvement in bond rates. And the thought being is that when people lose money in the stock market, they may want to put their money in something that is fixed income, like municipal bonds, and you don't get as high a potential return, but you generally have more security. And so we have seen sometimes when the stock market has gone down that muni yields go down because it's supply and demand. There's more demand, so we see the rates go down. What is interesting is we monitor the municipal bond funds, and we see that as a guidance as to what sort of the retail investment and investor interest is in municipal bonds. And those are people who are not only getting bonds on the primary market, but also able to get into bonds funds, which oftentimes buy bonds on the secondary market. And this week we talked about internally, I can't remember, it's either the last 40 out of 41 weeks or the last 41 weeks out of 42 weeks, municipal bond funds have seen inflows, which is a very positive for the municipal market.
Thank you on that. And now maybe the cost drivers or some of the things that we may have been putting in there that are not typical, but because it is maybe a STEM building that are driving those costs. Just help me understand maybe what those are, what the architects would see.
Good evening. This is Dan Luttrell with Huckabee. And listening to your question, Mr. Baldwin, I'm not entirely sure, but I'll answer it the best I can and then chime in, if I've kind of missed the mark. But, as far as designing for innovation, it's still the same material, same bricks, same, same mortar, same glass. And what you're hiring, the architects with that experience for is to utilize those similar materials, but in a way that makes the space be able to be more innovative. So there's really not a lot of cost drivers that are different for an innovative building. I mean, there could be additional technology and a technology infrastructure that may be needed that's over and above a standard building. But by and large, what you're paying for that innovation is the expertise of the architect, which I strongly believe and I would assert that Huckabee brings that level of design innovation. But just to kind of speak to how our costs are derived, as was mentioned earlier, nobody has a crystal ball to know exactly what's going to happen between now and bid day on a future project. But we track historical construction costs on projects in the Victoria and Gulf Coast region, South Texas, Central Texas, North Texas, all Texas. We've been tracking that same data for a number of years. We go back to that level of specificity back to 2015, and even before that, we have some general knowledge of cost. But going back to 2015, we actually have very specific data on projects not only Huckabee has done, but other projects because of our relationships with school districts and able to get that cost data, where we actually have a historical trend of what we use as $1 per square foot of parametric modeling system. Until this project is designed and bid, that's information we use. Is we know that historically, and I'm just going to make up some scenarios, that a middle school project that is a slab on grade foundation with a specific mechanical type like rooftop units, not a chiller system, costs $246 a square foot. And then what we've done is we've worked with our planning folks within Huckabee and with Dr. Bohmwald and senior staff to, again, as was mentioned earlier, nothing's been designed. Nothing's been fully programmed, but we've gone through the efforts to ensure that we have the information needed to be able to provide a bond estimate that is certainly workable as the exact program requirements of the district and those campuses come to light. Exactly how many classrooms, exactly how big to support the innovation. What kind of collaboration spaces does that require? Those types of things. And then, of course, we have good rules of thumb from TEA on minimum size requirements. For certain functions that we use and plug in. So we've actually developed what I'll call loosely the architectural program for the new campuses that determines the approximate square footage based on, as Dr. Bohmwald led off, a student population for each campus, and then using that information, and then using our historical data. Again, as was mentioned, nothing's been designed, so there are variables. There are a lot of variables in play when you're making these assumptions and these estimates. And I wish more than anything I could share my spreadsheet just for the level of specificity that Dr. Bohmwald and the committee has seen, on the efforts that we do have and how we can, I'm putting this in air quotes, prove or have it prove out, that this has worked historically with every client we've ever worked with on bond planning and establishing value. I know it's really long-winded. I apologize, but it's these values are based on, again, what we think what we know, not think what we know the current construction costs are. Just historically, we know that a project that was 150,000 square feet was just bid by the contractor for, I'm making up numbers again, $40 million. We know another middle school project of a certain size bid for a certain number of, a certain value, and when we track that and just keep our thumb on the pulse of what actual construction costs today. And then on our spreadsheet, we look at, if the bond were to pass in May, so there's time between now and then there's time to design the project and get ready to bid it. So we're looking forward, and and saying, hey, if the bond passes in May, the likelihood of Stroman, for example, going out to bid is probably somewhere in like September, October range of 2022. So then we also have been tracking historically escalation on, each year something costs more than the year before, right? So we also have that historic escalation cost. So we'll take that raw construction cost of what we know that project would cost today. We escalate it to when we think it will bid, again, using just all of our knowledge and information on how long it takes to design, bid, and build a project. And then we take that, it becomes the escalated construction cost. And as Dr. Baumwald mentioned, then we add in the fees that go along with it, the engineering, the design, permitting, surveying, just all the information that's needed to be able to actually develop the project for construction. We add the cost of the fees. We know that no project is perfect, so there's a little contingency that is added on, a small percentage. And the good news is if that's not spent, that money goes back to you. So that's not money just given to the contractor ultimately. And then obviously if you've got a new building, you're going to have new fixtures and equipment, printers, computers, desks, furniture, all that stuff. So it's, that's where these numbers come from. Just the raw construction cost only makes up about 70% of the numbers that you're seeing for the actual total bond project cost.
So would it be a fair statement to say if we tightened up the plans a bit, that we would have better knowledge of what the cost would be, even though they may be slightly higher from between now and November?
When you say tighten up the plans, you mean like just narrow to dial in the square footage that we're going to design to? I say whoever the architect is that's hired will design to?
Yes, sir. And actually really define the needs and what the
I'd like to,
purpose of the building would be.
I'd like to jump in here because I think that there's some assumptions that aren't accurate as a part of this conversation that are important for us to clarify. One being that as a part of the planning estimate process, the Huckabee team, along with our Stroman leadership team and our district leadership team, discussed the spaces that would be necessary to provide a campus for an innovative STEM pathway. And those general spaces and that general amount of space for a student population of 1,200 students was programmed to come up with a planning estimate cost. And then all those embedded costs were included. And I understand that some of the questions that the board sent us over the last 2 days, you may not have all had a chance to see, but one of the most recent pieces of information you were all shared was a breakdown of that $73 million cost. How much of that is actually raw construction? How much of that is technology cost expectations? How much of that is furniture cost expectations? So you can see the individual amounts. What I have experienced in the last several months and having various conversation with community member staff about these numbers is they'll see something communicated from another district where the cost for a similar size campus was projected to be this or is this in real time right now being built. And so there's a few variables there that have to be considered. One being, what's the size of that campus? It's actually being built now, not projected to be 2 to 3 years, what typically takes place in terms of a time frame from the successful bond to a middle school being built. But also, what is it that that school district is communicating? We worked with all-in costs for our task force because it would have been confusing and it wouldn't have been fair representation to tell them it's going to cost us this much to build the building and not include what is additional amounts that come in any project in any school district for contingency fees, for design fees, for the permits that are required. So I'm not sure that all that information has been available to be digested by the board yet. I understand that this is new information for you to receive. So don't want to make any assumptions there, but also want to make sure we're very clear that the facility hasn't been designed. So the cost estimates aren't based on specialized materials because materials haven't been determined. That's what would take place in a design process at the point in time that the board would be comfortable with selecting an architect to work with the district to design.
And of course, all of that would happen after the bond election, as part of the discussions that we've had. So the short answer is yes, Brett, your question is on point in that any design can be modified to trim or save costs. That's absolutely, but it's all sort of hypothetical for at some point in the future. It's not relevant here because we don't actually have those plans and designs.
And Dr. Baldwin, thank you so much. I appreciate that clarity, and I think the public should hear that. And I know that, there's always assumptions you have to go with, and please don't think I don't appreciate that, because many presentations I made in construction, they always right up front say, and why was this assumption made, and et cetera. I'm not trying to be that way. I'm just trying to fully understand if time is in their favor here, or would it really play that much of a role? And so that was why I was asking the question. And a lot of times, if we can identify cost drivers, we can absolutely tackle and go after them and try to minimize them. And I've, at some point, maybe not tonight, but that I have some successful experiences with in looking at ways to drive up those costs. I don't want to get in that kind of detail, but if I have something to add that can help, then why not? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Keeling. Is your hand up? Okay.
I think that, first of all, I want to say I'm not against anything in the bond. Personally, me personally, not against playgrounds. I think task force has done an excellent job. I really appreciate Mr. Sage saying, there's no good time to have a baby, right? I mean, I remember thinking that at certain times, like, whoo, how are we going to pay for that? It's almost like there's no good time for your AC to go out in the middle of the summer around here. And yet they do, and they wear out. And, can't find parts for a Commodore computer either. So things become obsolete, they wear out, and need to be replaced. I have no problem with any of the needs that are addressed or the way they are prioritized. The risk that is in my mind when it comes to discussing time is really around what can the community bear at this point in time? Because my preference is to take advantage of the low rates, the low interest rates on the bond, and to do what we can now. Now, I, again, do not have a feel from the community, even though I'm not arguing with the task force recommendation. I'm just wanting more information because I firmly believe we have urgent need and we've got to do something now. I would love to and see this whole package pass tomorrow, and so that we could get on it and get a STEM Academy, because the equity you're talking about is not just for, east or west or north or south. It is that, but it's also the opportunities for every child to find their unique path in the ISD. And that's what's important, that everyone can be where they need to be, and they have that the child and their parent have choice, and that we are moving towards that end. Currently, Stroman doesn't really have the capacity to function as a STEM Academy for choice. We're going to have to build that capacity, correct? Yes, that's why it's for 1,200 students. That's fulfilling what our community said they wanted in pathways through our findings and directions and all the many hours of work coming to how will the facilities support the findings and directions. But for me, the high risk is to the board and to Mr. Sage. The high risk is time. There's not a perfect time, and there's never going to be a perfect time. But I don't want to be tone deaf to this is also an exceptional time. And I want to be successful all together. So what I'm asking is, do we think we can find that point where we can in unity stand together, community, task force, and board for something as soon as possible? That's what I'm saying. All that being said, unity is incredibly important. If everybody but me feels like everything's fine, they've got their good pulse of the community already, and it's time to go, I will join that unity. I absolutely will. But I feel like there's information lacking from the community at large.
Thank you. Thank you for your candor.
I've got a few more hands, and I'm going to be real quick with my comment now. Number one, Dr. Shepard, thank you for protecting my honor, or at least my intentions with Mr. Mansker, saying that I wasn't against the bond, because I do want to stress the fact that I am wholeheartedly in support of what the task force brought forward. But something else important you said a while ago, Dr. Shepard, is everybody's entitled to your opinion, but not their own facts. I just want to make sure that if we push, or not push, but if we move to make our mark in May, that we feel like we can get those facts into the community, because, you know, I think Mrs. Keeling brought up last week some disinformation that was already out in the public. You know, crazy numbers were being quoted here and there, and so I just want to make sure. And that is my prime concern, is that I want the facts out in the community so that community can make a real decision, not based on a rumor they heard, or not based on, you know, something that was misquoted. But I want them to have the facts and then draw their opinions. But that's my only hesitation to pushing it to November, is I thought, well, maybe this is give us a chance to, because the minute we moved, I think, to vote in February, you know, is when they're going to say, okay, well, so-and-so did this without our input. And you know, but if this board decides to go in May, you got to know that I'm 100% on board. Absolutely. Biggest cheerleader for it.
I appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. You know, we're going to endeavor to get facts into everybody's hands and everybody's head if the signal from the board is go for launch. But you know what? It's also fighting the rumor mill and fighting the untruths, if you will, is a daunting task, and evidence of which is taking place in the last 2 hours. And in the last 2 hours, the local media, my job in part is to protect and look after the image of the district. In the last 2 hours, the media has reported at least 2 of our board members are against the bond, or leaning opposed to the bond. So that message is already out in the community. So as far as thinking about how we get facts out there, you know, we're only as good as the number of people who want to be a part of the story.
Good point. Mr. Mansker, you've had your hand up for a really, really long time, but you've talked more than Ms. Pruitt. So can I allow Ms. Pruitt to go before you? Do you have a problem with that? Ms. Pruitt, please proceed.
So I take my hand down. Let me see. Okay.
Good job.
Okay. So I hear a lot of, you know, our thing is time. So Dr. Shepard, when he first got here, started listening to our community, and has been listening to our community, has given us thought exchange, has been out in the community Tuesday mornings, to different Lions Club meetings, to visiting with the news. I think that we have time, and I know that Dr. Shepard is willing to make more time if he needs to go on TV, to talk about it, to go on radio stations. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to reach a lot of the community. And we're not going to just say, oh, well, we're going to give the community 2 weeks of information and bye, thanks. No, we've got until May to get out even more facts, to make sure it's in the paper, maybe have some column writings done by different community people that will bring up different questions. We have lots of time to May to be able to make sure our community is absolutely getting all the information that they need. But I think that task force has been meeting for 16 months. That's a lot of time. What have you done for 16 months? You know, I haven't stayed on my diet for 2 weeks. So, you know, you know, it's just, we've had time. I'm not saying that we've had all the time that we need necessarily, but I think that we need to think about how much time we've had. And then also not just on February, if we decide to move and make a motion or vote on February the 9th to put the bond, that's not the stopping point to get our information out to the community. I mean, that's, I don't know if that makes sense. I hope it does. But you know, it's not like, oh, you've got 2 weeks and then we're done with you. Good luck if you wanted to know more about the bond. No, we cut it off. You know, that's not, I hope not what's going to happen. You know, it'll be still more information, more informative until, I would hope, until May 1st. On May 1st, you know, having something big in the newspaper that says, this is about the bond, this is how much the rate would be, this is who's going to benefit, this is what's going to, you know, something to more frequently ask questions that would be addressed in the newspaper on that specific day so that they've got facts in front of them. And I think that Dr. Shepherd has done an excellent job getting facts out into the community on our website to people, engaging other people in the community and answering their questions. I know that Dr. Bonewald and Mr. Urbano, John Urbano, were in those conversations, and there was a lot of questions coming up, and they were there and they were answering those questions. They've got a lot of intimate knowledge about this bond and what's needed. And I have no doubt that they would be able to get out good information to the community and then continue to do that until the day of election or voting for the bond. Thank you.
Good point, Margaret. I had my hand up about 15, 20 minutes. I got to tell you,
I'm sorry.
I want to tell, that's Mike. That's Mike. I want to tell Mike that everybody's asking for at least three-minute break, just a 3-minute break. And so we want to try to take that 3-minute break at this time. Okay?
Perfect.
Did everybody hear me on that?
Yes, sir.
3-minute break at this time? All right. Okay. All right, everyone's back. In reference to everyone being back, I understand something that, of course, we had a Mike showing of hands. Mike, you said there were some hands up prior that were long.
Yes, sir.
Term. Okay, we want to recognize those hands.
Mr. Mansker.
Okay, I'm gonna put my hand down.
Can you see mine?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I can't now. Sorry, Pastor Van.
So here's the way I kind of understand it. And y'all correct me if I'm wrong. Personally, I'm for the bond. I think the task force did a really good job. I do. But also the task force set a standard of 87.5% to even bring the proposal to us, to agree to it. And all I've asked is that, what's our percentage? Are we willing to go 6-1 or 5-2 or 4-3, or do we need to be 7-0? I would prefer 7-0, and I've been honest with you on that. So the bottom line is, I think Mr. Baldwin has expressed some concerns about moving forward in May. Ms. Keeling is concerned about the time factors, which I'm a little bit concerned about that. We really need to make sure we have some community meetings. COVID will limit that. We can't do big community meetings that we've done in the past. It's just not going to work because we'll be a super spreader event. The reason why I said we really need to not push this any further than November is two things. I think the bond rates are there, and hopefully they'll stay there. We do a dishonor and disservice to the hard work of the task force. Yeah, I think what they've proposed is very good, and the administration. I also think that we do a disservice to our community if we don't. And that's the reason I'm kind of adamant about, if we choose tonight to skip the May, not go May, I want a commitment that we can at least go in November. Now, with the community meetings, it may be tweaked by then. I don't know. But I think you have a greater chance of getting a community meeting, a large scale community meeting, as the vaccine comes on board and there's more of this, if it's open. Right now, I think our restaurants are operating at 50%. The hospitalization rate in Victoria County is the highest I've seen. I've been watching it very closely. So those are concerns, and those are valid concerns. So does the board want to go, if we can get to a 6-1 consensus that we go, or a 5-2, that's fine. I will go for the bond in May. But what I need to know is, if we're not going to get there, can we at least give the community a firm date on what we're going to do? Because it really is almost an emergency time that we're going to take this up in November at least, and give them an opportunity in November. I'm just looking for something, some clarity.
Yeah.
Can I answer those two things that I heard? And so you all know this, but it hasn't necessarily been shared with the community. We've recorded several videos, 4 as a matter of fact, that we will be pushing out into the community, that we would intend to push out into the community as early as tomorrow. We've got countless social media messages, emails, EduLink calls. We've been working with the Advocate. We've been working with Crossroads. Greg and I are scheduled to talk to some of the radio stations as early as tomorrow, our Education Foundation Board as early as tomorrow. We have all of the local Rotaries scheduled, in contact with VEDC, contact with Chamber of Commerce. All of this would take place in the next 2 weeks, soliciting feedback from the community, to Trustee Keeling's point and to your point, Mr. Mansker. That's how we would get the community feedback in the next couple of weeks. But the last thing I want to do as superintendent is get in front of my board. You don't want me there, and I don't want to be there. So if the board says, yes, let's get this community feedback, we hit this thing, all systems go tomorrow morning, first thing when we hit the ground. So I want you to know that that's in place. And I understand your desire to, if we were to look at November, to commit the board to moving in November. I think the hesitancy, and I know it's come up several times tonight, so I just kind of want to speak to that a little bit. The hesitancy from a governance perspective is, I'm not entirely sure, and somebody on the board, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think this board can compel a future board that doesn't yet exist. Knowing that there's an election coming up, you can't speak for them. Right. And it might be you. You could all be the same people, but regardless, you can't even speak for yourselves at some future date. So you can't compel a future board to take action in that way. It would be great if you could, but.
Thank you. Very, very clear on that. I'm gonna be asking us to give dates. I'm gonna go by individuals to ask what preferable dates. But before I do so, something I don't think we have taken in consideration at all, and that is our staff. Our staff has placed in a tremendous amount of time and effort in this, but what we notice is that if we don't move forward, that staff could change. It's contingent upon our decision and direction we go. And November, the same staff that we want to implement these things might not even be in place. It may change, as well as this board is going to change in May. And so to guarantee something in November from a board now, we cannot do. Also, I wanted to take in consideration, if we would, is that we were asked by the superintendent to make sure we put our community on that task force. Names, individuals, people, contacts, and we did so to reach out totally throughout our community. And our community is represented on that board. And yet we say in response, we need more from our community. We're going to find some people who oppose the bond regardless. Matter of fact, the same people who opposed it the last time are raising their heads this time. And they're going to raise their heads again in November. So to fear failure, I'm not fearing failure. I'm fearing the fact that, because I know we're going to always have opposition. It's going to be there. But I fear our children not having a place for great education. I fear not having something good that they talk about in reference to a place where they're educated. I fear them not having the environment that they need. And so I'd like for us to go around this room and say November 9th or May. I mean, November or May, and get a consensus from this board. What date you prefer the bond to come forward? And Mike, you can get an idea of those individuals by asking their names and asking the month that they would desire to see us move forward.
Okay. In that vein, Mrs. Keeling, your hand has been up. But you're gonna have to unmute.
I'm not prepared to answer that question because we can't bind to November. So that's not a question that we can answer May or November, because as we just discussed, we can't even bind ourselves for the future. My hand was up because I don't fear failure in the same way. What I'm concerned, and I intend no dishonor to the task force. I support the bond, but overarching all of that is my concern about our total service to the community, not just those who could serve on the task force and have the time to serve on the task force as a representative, but the community at large. And one of the things that sort of concerns me, and I don't know, I know people have been tuning in and watching the bond planning task force. And I know they have been talking to the bond planning, people on the bond planning task force. But, you know, I will remind my fellow board members that not too many years ago, we met talking about a potential bond and no one showed up. No one showed up. And what did we make of that? Everything's okay. I don't think right now this is remotely the same process, because I do believe in designing our future together. I'm asking designing our future together a little bigger tent so that everyone is heard. And,
Let's wait.
And I'm sorry, it's not necessarily wait. I don't know that we couldn't hear that by February 9th. I'm not sure that that's impossible. That's my question. And the other thing is that we're not, as a board, we're not getting comments from the community at this meeting. We're having a workshop talking about a potential bond, and we have one comment. Part of that is because this is very difficult to send an email, right? It's read by somebody else. It's hard. We're not sitting with our community. We're not sitting together as a board. But part of what I almost feel or wonder is I just almost think people just can't handle thinking about anything else right now. They're worried about their job. They've got COVID. There are just so many concerns that almost even when I talk to people, they're like, I can't even process what you're asking me to do. And yet the work of the district must go on. This community will go on. And it won't be the last challenge we face. But and I meant what I said. If the feeling is it's this bond, it's right now, that's what we're going to vote on and have on the agenda, because we can't change what's on the agenda for February 9th, right? If that's what the discussion is tonight, the consensus is, and I believe, yes, to call a bond, you need a 7-0. I would like more information and the opportunity to have further discussion, because I want all of us moving together and I want to hear from people. And I just feel like they're so overwhelmed. I don't even know that they can process. You can put all the facts you want out there in the world. And I know we will. And I will be out there championing whatever we decide as a board and as a community. But, and I hope that's not dishonoring the task force, because you've done a stupendous job. Or this board, but I've had people calling me, but I don't have anyone address. We've had no one address this board about a very important workshop tonight. And that's concerning to me. I'll listen and then tell you whether or not I think May is right for time.
Dr. De Los Santos? You're on mute, Doc. You're on mute.
Thank you. Needed some clarification as to what we need to do tonight. It was just a workshop tonight, correct? And then we have to vote on the 9th.
To move
Is that
forward,
correct?
our staff is ready to move forward if we decide that we want to go in the direction of maybe having the bond, the February 9th meeting, a special call meeting, and go in reference to a bond for May. And so we were trying to get a consensus from the board to see, if that May date is where we want to go. So they can move forward. They could start immediately as early as tomorrow morning.
Just
Preparing, getting
to-
information out. Exactly. But if we're talking as a board already that we're going to delay, or we have a desire not to move that quickly, then they need to know that as well. It's only fair to them.
I see. So we just need to decide whether February the 9th is
Point of clarification, if I may. Point of clarification. I understand the question that you're asking. However, at the last board meeting, we talked about next steps being a thought exchange to gather more information. Did we not, along with the videos, so that people would know more about the bond and then be able about the proposal and then be able to give us feedback? That's part of
That
what
was
I thought we
that
were
was the
going to-
original that was the original plan,
Yes.
but that plan changed. That plan changed based on individual contact that I had with several trustees. That gave me indication that the feeling amongst several was that the timing was wrong. What I did not want to do is go out to the community and say that this is a proposal that the board feels strongly about and get feedback and potentially community support or not, to come back and present to you, the board, in February. And then you, the board, say to me, we never felt like the timing was right in the first place. And I didn't get a clear message from the board that the timing is right for a May election. And so I hit the pause button on the community thought exchange. I hit the pause button on all communications about the bond because I lacked unified clarity from the board that it's even the right time to have an election. And frankly, I'm still not getting that clarity from the board.
Okay, so a point of clarification. I was under the impression that we could run a thought exchange after this meeting. I can understand why we didn't do it. No one wants to be painted into a corner, right? No one wants to be painted into a corner, not the board, not the task force, not the community, not anybody. I was under the impression that if we wanted to move forward, that we could now have a thought exchange and get further. If that's not what we're talking about,
That's correct.
then
That's absolutely correct. Yes,
without
that is correct.
deciding, I mean, I understand, I understand that raises the potential of Does that change the bond? Could it potentially change how I felt about timing by the time we get to February 9th? It might.
Sure, totally. Yes. And I want to clarify again, because I know lots of folks are watching this and I want to be crystal clear. All of that is geared up and ready to go as early as tomorrow morning to start getting that feedback and input.
I think we should proceed. Just like to ask Dr. Bonewalt or any of the task force, any of the other task force committee members that are here, as to, did they get a feel or how much community input was given to the members? It was just my assumption that they had a substantial amount or a significant amount of contact with the community. Mr. Bonewalt, could you speak to that, or maybe anybody else that was on the task force?
I can to a degree, Dr. De Los Santos. Certainly as a part of our process, we would assign what we called homework, or what I called homework, and ask them to go out and talk to their circle of influence, their colleagues, their friends around various questions, and then to bring that feedback back to the group. And that was a part of the focus of several of our small group discussions. So it was definitely an expectation that they were not only bringing their personal thoughts, but also having conversations about what they were learning. It's one of the reasons that as we would hear feedback throughout the process, some of that less than factual information that we've talked about tonight would come forward, and it would allow us the opportunity to respond with graphs and charts and actual data for what really exists. And that was eye-opening and helped to inform further conversation with the task force and their community contacts. I don't have any way of putting an actual number on that, but definitely that was a part of our process.
Thank you, Dr. Bonewalt.
Mr. Baldwin?
Well, thank you so much. There's some great points, and I really am appreciating this discussion, because I don't think we've ever had this kind of discussion. So thank you all, board members. One thing that stands very clear to me, and I know Dr. Shepard well enough, that he's going to get prepared and he's going to go out and do his job that we've asked him to do. In fairness to him and his staff, we've got still some uncertainties, and I never like to operate with things that I can't control, or at least do my best at controlling. And he's done a yeoman's job with his staff and dealing with making decisions on when we go to school, when we don't go to school. And that's a lot. And to have him continue to do that and potentially also have to now worry about a bond and in COVID situations, which I think if I had my way, I think you all know, and I think we would all want to give a bonus and compensations for that. But boy, we're asking a lot for our staff, his team. And even though he's got a good plan, from what we just have heard, there's going to be some those gaps that we've experienced and we've learned in the past that we just can't, and particularly in a time when we are supposed to be doing our best to shelter ourselves. There's no doubt that we need the money, and there's no doubt that we need some repairs. And I just would like one other thing for everybody to think about, that I can think that I'd be surprised if anybody said, you know what, we thought exactly that. But we were heard in our audit that we had additional monies as a result of COVID that could help pay, if there's any silver lining, some of the immediate repairs to take that money. And then I leave that to Dr. Bonewald and Dr. Shepard to look at and see, so our kids aren't going to class with rain dropping in the cafeteria whatsoever. All the while we have focused on the COVID, getting back to normal. We're going to be faced with challenges from parents, do we do graduation the way we did last year, what have you? There's just so many other things that are going to be there that I want to give him clarity and prioritize opportunity to really focus on that normalcy. And as things get better, That's what I was thinking when we looked at maybe even possibly delaying. And Ross, to your specifics, I'd be willing, as long as I'm here, and we don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, but as long as I'm here, I think that I would have a concerted effort to answer your question. I'd be much more attuned to say, yes, I'll do what I can to support and make sure that we are totally having the community own, to Ms. Keeling's point, the more feedback and to drive it. And I don't think that we're going to see that much of a change, even though there's some change. To me, I'd rather risk getting our kids back to normalcy and keeping us there than thinking about things that are not really that critical to getting us there, even though I know we've said we've kicked it down the road. If we would have different conditions, I think we may be in a different conversation tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Mansker?
First off, I want to thank Dr. Shepard for reminding me I cannot move forward because I wasn't thinking correctly. We can't have I can't force the next board, since I won't even be on that board, to do something. So I appreciate that. And I wasn't thinking, I'm always thinking in terms of what we're doing right now. So I apologize to the board. I know we can't do that. For me, I will tell you it's a yes. If the Dr. Shepard can get that out by May 1st, and we can start, like the gentleman said, Mr. Sage, there's no good time. And, but I still think we need board unity going forward. And if we have 2 board members or 1 board member that does not want to go at all until then, I think we need to keep that in mind, because it's going to take everybody pushing the ship. And I think Ms. Keeling will definitely get out and push ship, and I think Mr. Baldwin will too. But you know, they had a standard of 87.5, and I agree with Ms. Keeling. I think it needs to be 7.0. But for me, 5.1 is fine. And thank you for getting my governance right. Thank you.
And Mr. Mansker, you'll always have public comment. Ms. Pruitt.
So I just have a question for you to think about, Ms. Keeling and Mr. Baldwin. So say we say, no, let's wait till November. And in November, we're still distance learning. We're still having to not be, not able to get together. We're still not able to have huge community involvement, as far as let's go down to the community center and have these discussions. The government changes drastically, and we can't come together with our community in November either, that our situation is the same as it is now. How is that going to make a difference for you? If you could kind of think about that, and then let me just what your thought would be then with that question.
Ms. Keeling?
So great question. And I think maybe, I guess I'm not explaining myself completely. What I really see is, I can't tell you whether the time is right or not until there's a community meeting of some sort, thought exchange, whatever. I very much support going forward with thought exchange, letting people know more information about the proposal, because they want to know, what is it, right? They want to know the needs, and there's not quite enough information in the proposal. We are very knowledgeable. We've read the facilities report. We've watched things, but the broader community really hasn't. So I'm very much in favor of putting out the videos, putting out a thought exchange. It might be that one of us thought it's not time because the community is not prepared in COVID, but the thought exchange has a community going, yes, we're ready, even though it's COVID. That's possible. They might also say, hang on, or maybe, we could do it this way. What I'm after is, can we in 2 weeks get that sort of information? So my thought is, yes, virtual community meeting, let's get some feedback, and then I think we will each know. I want to move the discussion forward. And whatever happens, I am not going to be the one person that tells my 6 fellow board members, I'm not going with you. I will. And wherever this community goes and wherever this board goes, I am going to be the biggest cheerleader person there is. Because I know the needs. I said that in the beginning. I have no doubts about the whys. I have no doubts about the opportunity. Nothing. The only question I have is, where is the broader community so that as a whole community, we can have success? Because we are in dire need. And so how are we going to get to success? That's make sure we understand where everybody is. And so I'm for move the conversation forward and see what happens.
Can I jump in here? Because I think this is really good conversation, and I think we might all be standing on the same island, although maybe not in the same place on that island. But generally what I'm hearing from the board is you want to hear more. You want to hear more from the community. And so what we can do is we can aggressively hit that. We've got, like I said, in-person meetings scheduled. We've offered to meet with any group that will have Greg and I. If it's a group of 2 or more, we're happy to be there. We're going to do digital forums. We're going to do in-person forums, and we will do our best to ascertain for you the feelings of the community in the form of this exchange, which will be live tomorrow. And you all can watch for yourselves what the conversation of the community has been. It will continue to change by the hour every day. I would implore you, Greg and I are going to, and Ashley and my staff are going to do everything in our power to get this message out. But I would implore you to do the same, because our community needs to hear you ask them to get involved in this process. They've heard me ask, they've heard Greg ask. They need to hear you ask as well. So we'll with your approval, board, and I'm seeing some nodding, we will go out and get more information for you, so that we can reconvene and see where we land on February. That sound like a plan?
I think Pastor Van Hook, did you want to respond?
I can, yes, it does sound like a plan. We can move forward in that direction, and see the response from the community, as well as those board members who feel like delay, no matter what is necessary, they can hear the response from that community.
Yeah, and I'll speak to that. I don't think it's a matter of delaying no matter what. I think it's just a matter of getting a better feel for what the water community feels like. Again, if this was a zero bond, then I don't think there would be an issue, but it's not. And so I think the community is definitely going to have a voice in it, but I'm not dead set on waiting forever. So I think hearing the community's feedback through the thought exchange and any other method that we can get it. And I'm sure our email inboxes will be full, which is awesome, which is great. And our phones will be ringing, which again is awesome and great. Yeah, I wouldn't say, my takeaway from this tonight, nobody wants to push anything off. We all know it's urgent. We all know it's important. I think for the most part, we agree what the task force has presented was really good and really touched on things, especially when we talk about the midterm, when we talk about there's already capacity built in to replace another aged and broken down facility. I think that there's a strong consensus there. I think our only hesitation was let's get a really good feel, because this is gonna hurt necessarily some people. That little bit is going to make a pinch, and so it's up to us to tell them what that truly is worth. But Mr. Mansker, I think you had your hand raised.
one thing that we need to keep in mind, when I say go May 1st, if I had the ruthers, what I'm saying is proceed to the next meeting. Not that I'm going to vote for the bond.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not asking you to do
The
that.
agenda to vote for the bond. So just so that's not misinterpreted, this is just to see, do we go to the next meeting or just stop here? And I think we go to the next meeting because the bond vote would be on February 9th. And I still reserve the right, and I think every board member should reserve the right to vote yay or nay. Okay? I just think that we go forward with the same deal. We'll see if we can get the community support. And get some community feedback through the thought exchange in these virtual meetings and see what goes. But no, I am not saying that anybody is going to vote tonight on the bond, and it's not even on the deal. So it's just a governance issue, because I was thinking about that people are thinking we're voting for it. We're not. So make that abundantly clear. Thank you.
Yep. No vote. No vote.
Good point. Dr. De Los Santos?
Just want to encourage Dr. Shepherd and the administration to be safe, and so the community feels safe. Also, do as much as you can virtually, especially with things the way they are in our community. Be safe.
Thank you. We'll do our best. Okay, I think I got what I needed. I got the information that I need to proceed accordingly, unless there was anything else. Other
Mr.
hands,
Baldwin, I believe, just raised his hand.
Do we have any other hands?
Baldwin.
Yeah, I did. Just one other thing. Sometimes just, and I really appreciate it, again, just keep in mind, perception sometimes can become a reality. And in that time frame that we have, if something were to go not in the direction that we have, then we have limited time to set the record straight, so forth, etc. And one thing that, if anything, I appreciated from Ms. Keeling was that she has already had some negative information. So therefore, she had to make effort to go and debunk that and make the fact. And I don't want us to spend time having to debunk or to go after misinformation, because then it becomes even controversial, and then it becomes even, well, there goes the board. And my perception is they're not in tune with reality. For heaven's sake, we're in a COVID pandemic. And I just really want the community to have trust. I want the community to know that we've had due diligence and discussions, and that we're putting it forward to them. And this is not a vote. I know that, and you know that. But we also have to be, be cognizant of the fact that there is perception. Sometimes it's difficult to get around. And so, yes, you put together some schedules. I don't know how much contingency planning you built into that. I hope some. And I know you can't foresee every situation, but I absolutely know, I'd be remiss to say that you will have something that you're going to have to divert your attentions, and you're going to have to deal with, and you're going to have to do it in a very swift manner. And I don't want us to go into, if that is the right timing for a bond, to have those difficulties. And that's one of the reasons why for tonight, I've been adamantly saying that I think we need time. I was willing to go to say, do what I can to make sure that we have that support for November. But clearly that was my concerns. I've voiced them. I definitely want to hear the public, and I definitely want to give you a shot, Dr. Shepherd, with your staff. But please make it very clearly known that if you have the choice between dealing with COVID issues or the bond, you've been very adamant about safety. That has to take precedence, even if it means that you have to forego getting some information out there.
Absolutely. Safety always going to be my top priority. And thank you for saying that, Trustee Baldwin. It means a lot to me that you've raised that twice, because it is my highest priority at all times. So thank you. Thank you for that.
I want to thank the staff as well as all of the board members for your strong participation, as well as our staff doing a fantastic job of providing this opportunity for us to share. And all things cleared, I guess we can adjourn this meeting at this time.
Yes, we can. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you.